We record macros for two reasons. One purpose is to replicate what we do over and over and over again so that we don't have to keep entering all those keystrokes. The other one is to see what the underlying VBA code looks like. Let's go to a new sheet. We decide that we have a task that we do over and over again that we'd like to automate. That task is to put a nice header on different lists that we'd like to make. Let's first create a practice list as follows. We will now create a header for this list. To do that, it's good to practice. We'll go Control, Shift, right arrow, and maybe I want to have some yellow color and bold and underline. That looks like a good header. So let's record it. Now I need to open up the Developer tab. I turned that off on my machine because many of you won't have that tab on your machine, and so let's go get it. File, Options, Customize Ribbon, and it's always been installed but is not turned on by default, Developer tab. You notice I can add new items, I can switch these tabs around, create my own tab that will do just what I want it to do, and many different things. But for now, we'll just turn on the Developer tab and say OK. You'll notice we have now Developer up here above. Let's back out of what we've done here so that it's new. We're ready to record again. And I'll go up Developer. I like to turn on relative references just in case I click on something rather than point and it goes over that relative distance rather than absolute. And then I click on Record Macro. We're going to call this Header. And I can put in a keystroke that works, maybe a small h or maybe a capital H. You'll notice Control Shift H will then run this macro. Pick a shortcut key that doesn't interfere with other shortcut keys you use. If I put in S, then every time I went to save it, Control S, it would run this header instead. Also notice this drop down. The VBA code for this macro will be included in this workbook. Thus, I can send it or give it to other people, and they can run that code just as well. I could choose to put it in a personal macro workbook. That is one that will be created if I don't already have it, and I can save any number of macros that I use often. It will save them along with my other Excel files, and whenever I open a new worksheet or any worksheet, it will make that one available as well. Or I could just simply put it in a whole different workbook. I'll leave it in this workbook and click OK. So now every change we make on our worksheet will also be recorded as the macro. Remember, we did Control Shift right, then we went up and put in yellow, bold, and underline, and when I'm done I can click on Developer, Stop Recording. You have now recorded your own macro. Let's see what it looks like. I'll go to Developer and under Code, Visual Basic. As you look over here in Projects, you can see there are 3 worksheets running on my machine right now, including that we're going to use in Solver. We're in Book 1, the default that I haven't used. You notice it created a module. Let me double click on that and open that up. Let's read through the code to learn from it. Sub means a macro has been recorded here or written. Ours is called header. You'll notice the beginning and the end of the sub. A single quote means this is for human eyes. The computer won't compile anything beyond that single quote. Let's go down and look at the code for the computer. Range is Excel's terminology for a cell or a group of cells. Selection is the cell that we first had, and then we did a Control Shift right, that's this portion, and at the end we told it to select those cells. With that selection, we're looking at the inside of the cell. It gives information about the solid pattern, no tint or shade, and color is what we really said. 65535 is a shade of yellow. Next, for the selection, it has a property called font, and font has a property called bold. We've set that property to true. Also, the font property called underline, we gave a value. This value represents a single style underline. If I was programming and didn't know what that was, I could simply record it and see what the notation is for a single style underline. Let's go back to our worksheet. By the way, I find it very cumbersome to go back and forth, having to get my mouse and going up to the menus. Instead, I put my thumb on the Alt key and hit the F11 key, and notice I can go back and forth very quickly using Alt F11. Okay, let's test out our macro. I will type name, phone, email, and type a friend. What we put down here doesn't really matter. Notice I have 4 columns in this particular table. I'll put my cursor in the left-hand cell of it and hit Control-Shift-H. You notice the macro then ran and filled in the information. However, note that if we had been in an empty cell like this and hit Control-Shift-H, it would have gone all the way over to XFD on my spreadsheet and back, and that would not be good. And like I said, once you've run a macro, you can't undo it. The only way I can get rid of this line is to highlight the whole line and delete. What if I had a macro that overwrote data? Boy, I would be in trouble. So I need to be very careful. In fact, this brings me back to the point that we should save our worksheets actually before we run the macro so that we can back up as needed. Let's go save this worksheet. I'll go File, Save As, Browse, wherever you want. Here, I'll just say temp. And notice it's saving it as an XLSX. That means it will strip out any of our VBA code and only save the worksheets. We don't want that. We need instead to save it as an XLSM. Wow, look at all that variety of ways that we can save our data. XLSM will save it both with the worksheets and the data, VBA data that is, all together.